Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints, just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We're continuing our run through of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, except for the fact that we are at the end of Season 3, so it's time for a wrap-up podcast. It's just going to be me talking about this. If you're unfamiliar, you just started listening, I do this after the end of every season of Star Trek that we go through. I sort of give my own thoughts, give a little bit of a wrap-up, give a overall vision of how I saw a season that we just went past as it unfolded in my mind. It's really just a chance to give out some silly awards, say what my favorite and least favorite episodes were, and then catch our breath a little bit before we head into the next season. Gives us a little bit of a break. So, if you don't like this, Way of the Warrior will be coming up on Thursday in a couple of days. And in the meantime, if you enjoy this, hopefully you enjoy this episode, because we have Season 3 of DS9 in the can, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about what I thought. So, Season 3. Each time we approach a season, I always have expectations about big change and things coming through. You always feel like things are going to be different next year when we get to this next season. Things are going to be drastically different. And it never really works out that way. However, Season 3 is, in my opinion, Season 3 is like a slightly improved version of Season 2. Although, if you guys are probably aware that we have a rating scale for the episodes, and I rate every episode from 1 to 5. And then at the end, I have an average for the season. It's how I sort of keep track in my mind about where the seasons stand relative to each other. Season 1 had a 2.37 average. Season 2 of DS9 had a 2.88, and Season 3 ended up with a 2.87. So it's pretty much the same as Season 2. Slightly worse, if you want to think that the rating system is that exact. It's 1/100th of a point worse than Season 2. But Season 3 was very good highs and very middling lows, I guess. There weren't a lot of terrible episodes. I think there's only 3 ones that I gave out this season, as opposed to 4 in Season 2 and then 3 in Season 1, although Season 1 is just basically a palooza. Season 3 started out strong, ended strong, had a very weak middle that we went through, and we were talking about that on the podcast, about how the show seemed a little bit meandering, it wasn't really going anywhere. And looking at it now, that stretches from Equilibrium to basically Through the Looking Glass, and that ends with Improbable Cause and Dies Cast. That's a long stretch where there's a couple 4s, you have Visionary and The Abandoned, but otherwise it is a stretch of 3s and 2s and a couple 1s sprinkled in there. The 1s being Equilibrium, Meridian, and then Distant Voices. It's a very long stretch for not to get a good episode out of things. The Visionary is pretty good. The Abandoned is pretty good. Visionary, I think, is better than The Abandoned, but both of those are okay. We gave them 4s. Neither of them are really standouts. You wouldn't say that those are classic episodes of Deep Space Nine by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a long stretch of mediocrity. And even Season 2 didn't really have that bad of a stretch. I don't think the early from the Siege onward to Sanctuary in Season 2 was pretty bad, but you still had Necessary Evil in there, and Cardassians was strong. And it's a much shorter stretch of episodes. The length of the problem of Season 3 really brought to the forefront the fact that the show is evolving and changing, and you can see that in Season 3, where they start to introduce the Dominion arc, and the Dominion arc episodes were by far the better episodes. Everything from the Search onward through the Abandoned, as we've mentioned, to the Improbable Cause Dies Cast at the end. The Adversary is very strong. And even when they weren't doing Dominion-themed stuff, I feel like the biggest change that they did in this season is that they got rid of the bad sci-fi B-plots that were really ruining Season 2. They did a new thing here where they had very small stories in the second half of the season. It's very small character beats. There's almost no conflict in anything. Explorers is an example of that. Facets is kind of an example of that. Let's see here. Yeah, Shakar would kind of be an example. They have sort of these little side stories that are very small, very character driven, but they don't really amount to much. There's not a lot of conflict. Explorers is really the one that sticks out in my mind, the Cisco and Jake exploring the Bajoran science prophecy or whatever, of getting a ship to Cardassia. It was a very small episode, not a lot of conflict, and it just kind of fleshed out the series, and it felt like the show was catching its breath after the Improbable Cause and Dice Cast. And I think that it's an interesting change. They moved away from the horrible shit show that was in season 2, where they had these horrible sci-fi plots that were B plots to the main A storyline, and some of them were so bad that they almost ruined the entire episode, A story and B story, because of how distractingly off tone they were, and they didn't fit with DS9. The series itself has a really specific tone and thing that works for it at this point. The sci-fi stuff that was working on TNG and TOS doesn't seem to work on Deep Space Nine as well, and it's at the show's detriment when they dig into that kind of stuff. Sometimes it works. You can still have a strong sci-fi plot, like Visionary is a very strong sci-fi episode, and it's one of the better episodes of season 3. But in general, the show moves away from that, and episodes that are like The Search, House of Quark, The Abandoned, Improbable Cause, Dice Cast, Explorers, Adversary, even Facets on some level, they're different than that. They aren't relying on tachyon grids and warp core bubbles and things like that. If they are, they use it as a reason to move into a more of a character exploration and fleshing out the cast. And it's a big difference between the series at this point. And season 3 of DS9 really sort of digs into that, and I think it works out pretty well. And what's interesting about season 3 is that you can see the show trying to figure out what it is. It bumbles along for most of the season. That middle stretch is where they really don't seem to have an idea of what they want to go with the Dominion storyline. They don't really know what is going to work to move things forward. They don't know how often they can sprinkle them in. They don't know what they should show. They don't know how much serialization they want to have in the show. But the main theme, I think, is what's defining about season 3 is that the primary theme is identity, at least in the first half. It's very strongly an issue, like The Search, House of Quark, Second Skin, The Abandoned, Defiant, Past Tense. It all has to figure out with figuring out who you are or how you fit into something, or how you fit into the universe, or how this universe's ethos fits into the TNG ethos of like the overarching Roddenberry thing. It feels very... If it wasn't intentional, it feels like it was something that was on everybody's mind in the writer's room of DS9 at that point, where how do we separate ourselves from the next generation? And they ended up with a lot of stories that are, who are these characters? What's going on? What's this universe all about? What makes these people tick? And it was really dominant. There's multiple episodes where Cisco pretends to be somebody else and assumes their mantle. Like that is a very odd thing to happen multiple times in a season, and they did it here with Past Tense and Through the Looking Glass. And that's really just an identity, playing with figuring out who these people are. And I think it's just the show itself is trying to figure out where it wanted to be in a very transitory season. It's between the arrival of Worf and the Klingon stuff, and it's post seasons 1 and 2, which are really not very good seasons of Star Trek on the whole. Season 2 was a bit of a laboratory experiment. Season 3 feels like a refined version of that. They've sort of figured out what doesn't work at all, and they can avoid those pitfalls. But at the same time, the structure of the series and the franchise of Star Trek is so determined at that point that it really sort of scuttles a lot of better ideas, and just the churn of TV at that point in the 90s, where you needed 26 of these episodes in a year. So it's hard to avoid those kind of churny, cliche, bad scripts. But you can see the show growing. It get much better. Some of the best episodes we've seen so far have been in season 3. The show itself is really difficult to follow along with without losing track of where you are. For instance, like in terms of the podcast, Modi hasn't been on a while, but we were just talking on Discord, and it's just really because after a certain amount of time goes, he hasn't kept up with the show. So it's very difficult to sort of plug in for one episode. It would be like a very worst case scenario of Clay not realizing that Bareil had died, except multiply it by a couple times. So it's tough on that. It's, on the podcast thing, it's tough to have people come on and sort of know what they're talking about. And it's also, difficult to consider the episodes as standalone things when so much of the tendrils of the show are reaching out into other areas and so much is being brought back in and looked forward to and all that stuff. It's what makes the show. But it's a very different thing from TNG at this point. It's sort of startling how different it is. It's obvious, and we've said it so many times, but TNG's episodic approach is just, you feel it in DS9, but it's really, they're referencing a lot of stuff that exists on the periphery, and it's not in every episode. They bring up things that you might not be aware of, like the Kira and Odo romance, which is brought into Field of Vision in this one. And yeah, it's different, and it's a very unique thing to DS9 at this point, and I think the show is still trying to figure out how it does that and what it does with it and where they can draw the line and still have it be a Star Trek show that's episodic, yet at the same time branch out into the Dominion threat, which is the main thing that's popping up. The Dominion appeared at the start. It was a very strong episode. You all remember Clay getting very excited when the search happened, saying maybe he was fully in on DS9 at this point. The show quickly scuttled that and moved us into that middle stretch where there were no Dominion episodes. They would mention them every once in a while, and we kind of rode that high for a little bit where you'd have episodes where they would mention, oh, it's very scary that the Dominion are out there. Let's have a sci-fi plot instead. And at the end of it, they came out of it with Improbable Cause and Dice Cast, which are very excellent. And then at that point, I really feel like the show shifted into something else, and it ended up with The Adversary at the very end, which is the this sort of the Thing ripoff, not a ripoff, but a Thing homage to Carpenter's Thing. And the show feels different at that point, and it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, but not really. And then we're going to move into season 4, and everything is laid out for that. So, it was a good year. It was better than a Russell Crowe's good year, but it was a pretty good year of TV. The middle of the season is pretty awful, and maybe one of the other things that I really liked about the season was there were a couple episodes that flesh out the station itself and the setting of the show. Civil Defense is like logistical, how this used to be a mining slave labor factory is really done well in that one. It's amazing it took 3 seasons to get to that point where you really get your feet on the ground of the station and see what's going on. And Fascination wasn't a good episode, but Avery Brooks's direction was really great there, where it came a lot of camera panning and camera moves between floors of the station, and you really get the sense that this is a lived-in place. It really brought the station to life in a way that no other direction had, and I think that's really the main thing of that episode. It is a place, and there are levels to it, literally and metaphorically, and it's a shared space that doesn't seem as much of a TV set as TNG did, or at least directing it that makes it feel different. It is different from a ship. It's a space station where there's a lot of mixing in society and town and all that stuff. It's the Old West allegory. It's a growing town. But the direction there really highlighted the fact of how much of a little society that they have on the station. And that was good. Those are things that are very important for the series to do, I think, because it is a difference between DS9 and the rest of the series. That's about it. So let's give out some awards. I do this all the time. I give out silly awards to a couple of random categories that I think of off the top of my head, and I write them down. I come up with answers. So we'll go with the worst characters. Who had the worst season? Which character had the worst season? Dax is close with second. I feel like I'm constantly picking on Dax because I say it, but Dax did not win this. It's actually Bashir, I think, because he had Distant Voices, which was very bad. Did I mess this up? He did not have that one. Sorry, what the hell did Bashir have this year? I might have to change my answers here. He didn't have Fascination. He kind of had Past Tense, so that's more of a Cisco thing. Life Support, I guess. He had Life Support, and this is what happens when you don't write this down. He had Life Support and Distant Voices, which are pretty bad. Actually, I think I have to go back here. It is Dax who was the worst season. I wrote down Meridian. Bashir did not have Meridian. That's Melora. Meridian is Dax. So Dax had Meridian and Equilibrium. balanced out a little bit with Facets. Is that better than Bashir's life support and distant voices? I think Dax is actually a worse season there, even though Facets saves her a little bit. I'll have to go with Dax, I guess. Dax gets the award for the worst season. I feel horrible. I'm constantly picking on Dax, but Facets was good. I'm not going to change my mind here. I think it is Dax just because those 2 episodes, Meridian and Equilibrium, are so bad. But Bashir had distant voices, and I think that puts him in second place for that. So Dax is the worst character. I think she's won all 3 years running, so maybe that says something about the character. Although I am getting tired, and I'm aware that I'm it's tough. You end up at this spot where the Star Trek female characters are the worst written characters by and large. DS9 does better with Kira on the show, but the female characters have never really, on the shows that we've watched so far, they don't exist in TOS, really. It's just Uhura, and she is not really a character in this series. She's more of just a answering machine. And on TNG, you have Crusher and Troy. And then on this one, you've got Kira and Dax. And I think it's tough. You come across as if you end up in this space where you have to criticize those characters, but you are always criticizing the female characters. And I think that people who listen sort of only in one ear might mistake me for saying that, or thinking that my problem is that there are female characters. It's not really. They're really just not written very well. Dax is a poorly written character. Troy is a poorly written character. Dax is more egregious on the sense that Troy's job didn't really make sense for that character on that series. Dax should make sense, and having the Trill symbiont feels like it should be better than anything that they do. So it's very frustrating. I'm aware it seems that I'm picking on her, but it's really not that. It's just that they really just didn't do that character justice. It's really a problem. Facets was good, though. They should have done more like Facets. If all the episodes that she was in were similar to Facets in quality, that's fine. That's a fairly good season. All right, next award, Best Character. It's Odo, actually. I think Odo undergoes a pretty Kira-esque growth development in this series. And Kira went through a good growth arc in her first season, almost to the point where you wonder if the showrunners don't know what to do with her anymore. Instead, they just pair her up with wet cardboard male characters, and they say that these people are in love. Odo's development from the Search to the Abandoned to Improbable Cause as cast to Adversary is a real arc, moving from finding his people to trying to change his people when he meets the Jem'Hadar boy, which ends up with the great line about the boy, you were right, to Kira from Odo, to Improbable Cause, where you learn a lot about what Odo is thinking on the inside, and maybe he is desperate to try to change the Jem'Hadar boy because he himself is scared about what it means to want to go home. In the Adversary, he ends up killing another changeling. No one has ever done that before. What does that mean? Is he now stuck with the Federation? Does he still want to go home? It's a good little arc for Odo, and Odo remains one of the more interesting characters just because of his attachment to the Founders. He sort of by default has to be interesting because they are the main adversary. And I think that the show does really well with him. Auberjonois is a great actor. The character is really well written and consistent. He has a voice that you can always understand. You always understand what he's going at. He has a little bit of conflict with him, and now we're revealing secrets. The Kira thing, his love for Kira is another thing that was revealed in that season. So it's good. Odo is by far and away, I think, the most fleshed out character. I don't know if he's my favorite. I do like Odo, but he's the most, I feel like he's the most fully formed character that the show has at this point. Best Director goes to Avery Brooks for Fascination. I explained why. It's a bad episode, but the direction really shows off the station very well, and I enjoy it. Best Script goes to Improbable Cause. I think Improbable Cause has a very lean, very tight script that doesn't make a lot of mistakes, plays off the characters well, gives you a couple scenes of interactions where two characters, Garrick and Odo, are fighting with each other, and I think it really fleshes out both of those characters. It's a good mystery. It doesn't rely on Star Trek technobabble nonsense to solve the mystery. It ends up with a great little cliffhanger. implies more is coming down the line. It led into Dice Cast. Improbable Cause is a really great episode of the show, really well written. It's a little bit smaller than the Dice Cast, so I don't think it's as memorable because it doesn't have that epic nature that Dice Cast does. But Improbable Cause is probably one of the strongest scripts that the show has done so far, along with something like Duet is a very good script. Necessary Evil would be another one. I think those are some of the most well-written episodes that the show has done. Worst script, Distant Voices, because they took an idea that needed to be wacky and goofy and they made it nothing, and they made it boring and plotting, and they had the characters explain that I am your fear, I am paranoia, I am your horniness, or whatever the hell was going on. Really bad, a really boring script and took a Freddy Krueger-esque villain, stuck it into Bashir, made up a problem with him, and then blamed it on tennis or something by the end of it. A lot of potential there. Monosky script could have had a lot of potential, could have gone really weird places, didn't go anywhere with the idea, so it ends up being the most underutilized, underbaked script of the year. Distant Voices. Most pleasant surprise episode, Explorers. I mentioned at the time I don't think I'd ever seen Explorers because the thumbnail and the description sounded awful. The Cisco's go on a vacation to prove that their solar ship can fly to Cardassia. It's like, oh boy, this will be really awful. But instead, Explorers is maybe the best episode to show what the show did in its later, last third of the season. Small episode, small character problems, good character interactions, strong writing, characters know who they are, show knows what it's doing. Felt really good. Was very effective. Well, it's just that's the most robotic description, but it's a really, when the show can do small, somewhat dull, I'll say dull, but I don't mean that in a bad sense. It's a very dull episode and that not a lot goes on, but it's very effective. It works for you. And the show does that in a way that season 3 of TNG probably couldn't have, and maybe TNG never actually did do things like that. But that's it. It was a very pleasant surprise. Explorers. Biggest missed opportunity character, Tom Riker in Defiant. Riker's kind of the MacGuffin in that one, but since we love second chances so much, we love Tom Riker so much, it was a little disappointing that he is brought in just to steal the Defiant and serve as a means to an end for the Maquis in that one. We don't really get a lot into Tom Riker's mind. We don't learn what makes him tick or why he feels this way or how everything's falling apart because he can't live up to his clone, Will Riker. It's a chance to do something. We never see him again. He goes off in a great sacrifice at the end, I think. I like that more than Clay and Darren did, but I think it's just a missed opportunity to really use that character because he's a pretty interesting concept for a character, and there's a lot of tragedy to him. And I feel the episode didn't really do him justice. It just kind of brought him back as hey, we got John Frakes on the show again, and it's not going to be Riker. We can do something else with it. It'll be this other Riker, which is Riker, but it's not the real Riker that you know and you love. This is Tommy Riker. So that's it. Missed opportunity character would be Tom Riker. I like the episode Defiant, but I just don't think that they really pulled it together in terms of Tom Riker anyway. Best scene. A lot of options here. But I'm going to go with... on all levels, from writing to acting to direction to cinematography, I'm going to go with the Odo and Garrick final scene in the Dice Cast, where Garrick is cleaning up his bombed out shop and Odo appears and you see Garrick in the frame, and then Garrick's mirror is showing you Odo, just a reflection of Odo in the shadows in the background. I really like that scene. Those two talk about it. They hash out their differences. They're going to have breakfast with each other at some point. It's well acted. The direction is sort of brilliant to show Odo in the shadows like that. They're still a little bit disconnected from each other, but they are seeing each other. And the mystery of Odo, the enigma of what Odo might be at this point, is represented in the mirror. I think it's really good. It's a really, I think Clay mentioned at the time, you don't see the show do a lot of stuff like that. It's a very cinematic way to shoot something. Those are two very strong characters, very strong writing. It's the best scene, I think, by far. The worst scene. The worst scene is when Bareil gets his brain taken out or whatever they do, and he acts exactly the same as he had when he had a brain. And the characters are all going, isn't this terrible? He's totally different. He'll never be the same. And I'm like, this is the same goddamn guy. He's just sitting there and talking slightly slower. That was the worst. that was just a bad episode. I can't believe that wasn't a Kira episode. That's such a disgrace is a strong word, but it's such a letdown for the Kira character that turns out to be a Bashir episode. It makes sense to be a Bashir about the medical ethics stuff, but why? Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, Bareil's gone. Anyway, he goes out with the worst scene. Brainless Bareil talking. Best sci-fi episode, Visionary. Visionary is by far the best sci-fi episode that the show... It's probably the best sci-fi episode the show has done to this point. I'm just going to look at the list real quickly. Whispers would be up there. And by sci-fi show, I just mean one that really is a high-concept episode that depends on the just sci-fi nature concept of the episode. I think that's it. Yeah, I would say it's either Whispers or Visionary. I think Whispers is actually a better episode than Visionary, but Visionary is very good. So take that for what it's worth. But this is the best sci-fi episode of the season, is Visionary. Chief O'Brien coming in strong with the sci-fi episodes. That's it. Those are my awards. So let's go to the best and the worst episodes from the third season. I used to do videos for these. I don't think I'll do them anymore. They take a lot of work, and they just kind of... I don't think I have enough time to do that really well. I could do them really badly, but the other ones already have a template laid out for them, and I'd have to match that to keep things consistent, at least for my own sake of what I consider to be consistency. And I don't think I'm going to do that. So I'm just going to list out the best and worst of each season here. I apologize if you guys like the videos, but I just don't have the time to do that stuff. We'll start out with the worst. So the fifth worst, we'll start at the number 5 and work down to 1. I ranked them. Destiny is the fifth worst. Destiny, the Cardassian science thing where they set up the little transcommunication wormhole thing. Number 4, life support, Brain Dead Bareil. That's all I have to say. It used the wrong character as the lead character. Kai Wynn, confused as ever. Is she a good villain? Is she a bad villain? Equilibrium, number 3, the Dax episode, which is where they reveal that the Trill Society is all a lie and all that stuff. The Equilibrium is the better of the weak Dax episodes just because of the Eyes Wide Shut villain there, but otherwise there's really nothing to keep your interest. Number 2 is Distant Voices, which is the Bashir running around in his dream sequence storyline that just didn't amount to anything, was very bad. And then Meridian is number 1 worst. Meridian is the DS9 episode with the people who are phasing out of existence, and we're supposed to believe that Dax has fallen in love. This entity that has lived centuries apparently can fall for a fling and not sort of think twice about it, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You'd think Jadzia's memories of the previous host would be enough to sort of go by. I guess not. That's what it is. And then they disappear for 60 years. And then we have Sad Dax at the end of that episode. So that's it. Meridian is my least favorite episode of the third season. The best episodes. We'll start with number 5, Explorers. I talked about it a lot. It's that little tiny episode about Cisco and Jake going off into a solar ship. Really nice. A really nice small episode. I like it a lot. Number 4 is Visionary. We talked about that. The sci-fi. Chief O'Brien flashing into the future, seeing himself die, seeing the ship blow up, and then getting sick and killing himself. And we're stuck with O'Brien from the future, 5 minutes into the future for the rest of the series. Think about that, man. Number 3, The Search. The opening 2-parter, which is an excellent introduction to the Changelings, excellent introduction to what the Dominion game plan is, how they explore and analyze their enemy. A little bit of a mind trip there at the end that got Clay, I think. He was unaware of what was going on. Well done episode. Number 2, The Dice Cast. It's the action-packed episode of the 2-parter, Improbable Cause and Dice Cast. Because it's action-packed and because it has a scene where people are just riding on the Defiant for 15 minutes, it's not quite as good as the number 1 scene, which is Improbable Cause, or number 1 episode, which is Improbable Cause. Just because that episode is so perfectly written. It's smaller, so it's less... You don't see the fleet attack and all that stuff. You don't see the Jem'Hadar obliterate the Cardassian and Romulan fleet. You don't deal with the fallout. There's no action sequences as such. But it's good. It's a really tight little script, excellently done. And Improbable Cause and The Dice Cast are the number 1 and 2 of the best. They complement each other. I just think that the second half is a little bit weaker. So that's it. So the 5 worst, from 5 to 1. The worst are Destiny, Life Support, Equilibrium, Distant Voices, and Meridian. The best, 5-1, are Explorers, Visionary, The Search, The Dice Cast, and Improbable Cause. That's my choices. That's it. I think we are done here. Let me click around. We are done. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. I know not everyone loves these season wrap-ups, but I do need a chance to catch my breath and think about where we stand at this point. If you enjoyed the content, you're on YouTube, a thumbs up is appreciated. If you're on iTunes, a rating and review is really appreciated. We have a bunch now. People have really taken to the call of using their phones, which is something you can do. If you have an iPhone and you listen to the podcast, I would greatly appreciate it if you rated the show and left a little sentence about I like this podcast or something, just so it gives people something to read. I like reading them, even if they are something like I like this podcast. It's much appreciated. It really helps the show get up in the little iTunes search results, which is everything to the visibility of the show on podcast form. Otherwise, patreon.com/the Pensky File. If you go there and you want to support the show, if you say, you know what, I'd like to do something a little bit better than rate you on iTunes, patreon.com/the Pensky File is the way to go. A couple dollars a month, you get extra content. We do extra podcasts. You get to vote on what we talk about. You can get some live streams, which might be coming up in the future. You can get vlogs. You get to vote. I think I said vote, but voting is very important. It talks about how we figure out what we talk about on Real Ripe and Real Rotten, what kind of topics we talk about on the Patreon only podcast. But yeah, check that out. If you want to support the show, that's really greatly appreciated. I think that's it. All the social media links, blah, 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 Facebook, Twitter, Discord. Go to Discord if you want to talk. That's where people talk. But I like the Discord channel, and you can find us there. I'm there pretty much every day. There's people chatting about this and that, talking about Star Trek, talking about the upcoming Badass podcast, talking about Real Ripe, talking about movies, all that stuff, posting memes, because we are the meme generation. I think that's it. We're going to be back with Way of the Warrior in a couple days. Season 4 kicks off with a feature-length episode, and Worf is on the station at this point. Worf remains on the series for the rest of the series. Thank you very much, guys, for supporting the show. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you thought about Season 3. Let me know where you think Season 3 stands so far. If I were to rank the seasons, Season 1 is the worst of DS9, obviously. I think Season 3 is the best, but it feels like less of a leap forward than Season 2 did over Season 1, if that makes sense. Season 2 felt like they were really trying stuff. Season 3 feels like they refined what they figured out in Season 2, but they didn't do it enough. They just didn't push the envelope enough. And so maybe Season 3 feels like a little bit of a letdown. Let me know if I'm right or let me know if I'm wrong. But it's interesting. It's very close to Season 2. When you'd think it would be much more of a jump forward in quality, it didn't end up being that. Anyway, I've rambled enough. Thank you guys very much for listening. Thank you to the patrons. You guys are the only reason that we do DS9 at this point. I say it all the time, but it's absolutely true. And thank you very much to everyone who listens. You're greatly appreciated. We hope you enjoy the show. We're having a lot of fun doing it. And we're about to move into Season 4 of DS9, which is one of the best seasons of Star Trek, in my opinion. If I'm looking at these episodes and remembering them properly, I might have something else to say at the end of this when I do the Season 4 wrap-up. Maybe I was wrong, but hopefully not. I think everyone else has said that it's a very good season. So we're moving into it. Worf is here. The Klingons are here. Sisko is bald. And he's got a beard. And we're on it. All right, guys. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next time.